Hey everyone, my name is Sage Jankowitz. I am a local real estate broker focused on Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, and surrounding towns. I am very excited today to be chatting with attorney Adam Dash. He's like the go-to guy for all things Somerville zoning, in my opinion, and many others of people that I talk with. So I'm super excited to get into this. Um, Maybe before I kind of start hitting with a bunch of questions, just for people who don't know who you are, can you kind of give a quick overview? I'm also really curious to know, like, how did you become one of the go-to people when it comes to zoning issues in Somerville? Like, what's the story of how you got there, and just a little bit more about who you are?
Sure. Hey, I'm Adam Dash. I'm here at the law firm of Adam Dash and Associates. We're at 48 Grove Street in Davis Square in Somerville. Been here since 1993. How we got involved in zoning? It's an interesting question. I was working at a law firm downtown for a few years, then left there in 1993, opened my own office here in Davis Square. And early on, some people I was talking to, I don't even remember why, were having an issue with a project next door to them that they didn't like. They wanted to know if I would be interested in representing them and opposing it, which I did successfully. And then other people said, oh, hey, I saw you do that. Would you be interested in doing this? And then people who are doing projects are like, well, I see you were in front of the board. Would you help me do the project instead of just opposing them? I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're good projects and they're bad projects. They're ones I favor and they're ones I don't favor. So happy to help. And there were a couple of other attorneys in town who did them. And as time has gone on over the last 34 years, other attorneys have retired and passed away, and I'm still here. So I guess some of their cases have fallen to me is probably the real reason is one of the reasons. I would also say we do good work. Myself and the associate attorneys who work for me, although most of the zoning is me personally. I think we do good work. We've had a good track record of success. We've worked well with the neighbors. We've worked well with the city. We've worked well with developers. We occasionally do represent people opposing projects. And I think that's how we've gotten into it. And I guess over time, we've just sort of become people like to work with us. I think we're good to work with. I like to think that I'm a decent person to work with. So that's just the way it is. There's nothing nefarious. And I think there's a certain, there's the written rules and the unwritten rules. And this is the case in any town, because most cities and towns, there's one or two lawyers who handle all the zoning cases, because every city and town has its own separate zoning regime. So we handle Cambridge, Somerville, and Medford. And I don't do other towns because I don't know them, and other people don't do Somerville because they know they don't know it, and that's just sort of the way these things generally work in most cities and towns. Because you can read, anybody who can read English can read a zoning ordinance, right? It's not what the words are, it's how they're interpreted, how that interpretation evolves over time, working with the various staff members, knowing what the members of the board want to see and don't want to see. That kind of thing is, I think, where the skill just the experience of having done this so many times,
Yeah, that
that
makes
we bring
sense.
to
No,
the
that was,
table.
yeah, that's a really good intro. I think if it's okay with you, I just kind of want to get into a bunch of questions here. And I think one of the ones that I have seen a lot in the last year or so
Okay.
is the ADU cottage. And like, I get this all the time from multifamily owners, single family owners, potential buyers, whether it's a single thinking about multi-generational living or an investor. And are you able to kind of just give like high level breakdown on like, I think most people just want to understand, like, is this something that's actually still like very tricky to do, or is this something that's very easy to do? What should I be looking out for? What is the process like? Just kind of like break down how that's going right now.
Yeah, obviously anything I say here, I'm not giving legal advice to people because
Yeah,
I'd have to look at their particulars. Every
individual.
property, every
Yeah,
property is unique, and
yeah.
everything is zoned differently. However, just
Of course.
generally speaking, they're two different things, and people conflate them. One is the backyard cottage that the zoning ordinance allows in Somerville, and the other is this protected use ADU that the law in 2024 at the state level allows.
For the
Right?
900 square foot. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, not more than half the gross floor area of the building, or
Or
900 square feet, whichever is smaller. Yes.
yeah.
In Somerville, we got in before that because in the December 2019 zoning change, this backyard cottage building type was put in, and this is years before the protected use ADU law came in, because Somerville's ahead of the curve on this. And that was to allow a backyard cottage It could be a converted garage, could be a converted carriage house, could be a new building in the backyard, because a lot of people were tearing these nice carriage houses in the back of their house down because they couldn't use them for anything under the old zoning. So this was sort of to incentivize people to keep them, and also to allow people to tuck away an additional unit in the back without, changing the streetscape. So it did allow them. However, the backyard cottages originally were just by special permit. They've since, to city's credit, made them by right in the neighborhood residence zone. What also
Can you explain just to some listeners don't understand maybe even things like by right? Can you just kind of explain like what that means versus special permit? Yeah.
If I start getting too jargony, slow me down. I love talking about zoning, but dumbing it down can be hard sometimes because it's complicated stuff. But what I mean by right, I mean you don't need a special permit or a variance. There's several different ways to build a project. By right means you can just go into the inspectional services department, apply for a building permit, get it, and build it. There are some instances where you need a special permit, which is you can build it, but you need a permit from the planning board usually, or maybe the zoning board of appeals, depending on which zone you're in, to build it. And you have to meet certain criteria. There's a public hearing, there's neighborhood meetings and such. There's also variances, which are even above that, which is I want to build something that violates the rules, but I have a particular weird hardship with my property. It's this weird dogleg shape. I can't make the setback, or it's on this massive slope, so the front will be the right height, but the back will be too tall. So and when you average them, I'm too tall, but really I'm not. So you can go get a variance because you have these weird situations on the property that dictate it. Again, I'm dumbing this down, but that's the general gist. So when I say by right, I mean you can walk into inspectional services, get a building permit. There's no public process whatsoever. So they did say that backyard cottages originally required a special permit, and you'd have to go to the zoning board. They since, to Somerville's credit, changed that, and now they're in the neighborhood residence zone. The city is divided into a bunch of different zones. And some of them are commercial, some of them are mixed use, some of them are residential only. I would say probably 90% of the city is neighborhood residence, which is the general neighborhoods, which is residence only, 1, 2, 3 families, that kind of thing. So this allows, they changed it to make it so that you could add a backyard cottage in the neighborhood residence zone by right now. Meaning if you meet the
single, 2-family, or 3-family, as long as it's in that zone, you can still add it.
Correct. So even though you're limited in the NR zone at 3 units, you can still add a 4th by building the backyard cottage, right? So and it has to meet certain criteria, otherwise you're going to be in the variance zone where you don't meet the criteria and you're asking for permission to not. They then extended it to the UR zone, the urban residence zone, which is the higher, more dense, like apartment building residential zone, because what they were finding is that people didn't want to build an apartment building. I had several clients who had like a 3-family and wanted to do something small in the backyard, and they couldn't. They could tear down their building, their 3-family, and build an 8-unit apartment building, but they didn't want to do that. All they wanted to do was add the 1 backyard cottage, and so what we were doing is changing the zoning and down-zoning ourselves from UR to NR so we could build the backyard cottage, which makes no sense. So the city realized enough people were doing that where they said, okay, you can do the backyard cottage in the UR zone too, because we don't want people to tear things down against their own will. Now, that's the backyard cottage piece. The protected use ADU that went into effect in 2024 that you were describing allows you to add an extra unit of up to half the gross floor area of the building, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller, and that would be by right as well. However, the city can impose certain reasonable restrictions on it, and what those are is still a bit in flux because the law is still relatively new. The city has said that they're going to be issuing guidance on these protected use ADUs under that law. Hasn't happened yet, and obviously the holidays and the new mayor changed over, and so I get that. But we're expecting to see some kind of guidance on that, because that's been something people since the law passed in 2024 that they've been very obviously interested in. So there's multiple avenues. The protected use ADU only applies to zoning districts that allow single-family dwellings. So it wouldn't apply to like some of the mixed use, zones. But it would apply to like the neighborhood residence, because neighborhood residence allows you to build a single-family house.
Got it. Okay. And so I guess if I'm someone and I'm like, hey Adam, I'd like to add an ADU. It sounds like the guidance is up in the air. Like, what would you recommend? Would you hit the pause button for now? Like, what would be the recommendation at this point in time if you want to explore the next step with you?
Some people do want to hit the pause button and they're waiting, and I've got some clients in the wait and see mode. I have other clients who are just plowing ahead, and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
But if they meet the criteria, I've had the city has pushed back on some, saying they're exercising their right to make reasonable restrictions. They can do reasonable restrictions on things like size or short-term rental ban, that kind of thing, of the units. It's all a little bit still new. So I've got to say nobody has a ton of experience with this right now, but we're working on it.
And so for both the ADUs and cottages, just to be clear, if these were to be built, the owner could have, a relative live there, they could occupy it, or they could rent it out, assuming it's long, like let's take away short-term rentals for a second. All that would be okay for both of those situations?
Yeah, or you could, if you condo converted the property, for instance, you had a 3-family and a backyard cottage, you could condo convert it into 4 units, and that backyard cottage would just be 1 condo unit.
That could be sold off or held onto or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What about, let's shift gears a little bit to multifamilies. This is another question I've got for since the beginning of time, which is like, I have this large 2-family, there's a 3rd floor, and I want to turn it into a 3-family. Or I have when I bought this, there was a family with an illegal basement unit. We removed everything. It's legal. There's no one living there now, but the ceiling height looks good. There's an area where a kitchen could go. How easy is it in your experience to make those conversions from 2 to 3 families? I have a lot of people who want to understand, is this an easy process? Is this high rejection rate situation? Can you share a little bit about that kind of thing? Because that's another big one I get all the time.
Yeah, well, there are 2 different things. There's use, and then there's the dimensional requirements. The use requirements and dimensional. So, typically speaking, in the pretty much in the UR zone, like say in a residential zone that you're describing, 3 units is allowed. Now, there's certain. The new zoning in 2019 is a form-based zoning, which means what it does is it divides the city into zones and then allows certain kinds of buildings in certain zones, and those buildings have to meet certain dimensional requirements. And then each of those zones and those building types have certain uses that are allowed. So some are allowed, like if you built a cottage, you could only have 1 unit. If you built a detached triple decker, you could have 3 units. So it would depend on what building type you have as to how many units you could have. However, the use itself, 3 units in the NR zone is not a problem. However, you may have a building type that doesn't allow for it, or you may not meet the dimensional requirements to have it, like you don't have 1 outdoor amenity space per unit or something like that. There are requirements. If you meet all of the requirements, then it would be easier. Certainly easier than it was back under the zoning pre-2019, because the zoning now is trying to incentivize creating more housing of all types, market housing and affordable housing of all types, because we need housing for all types right now.
So if someone let's say I have a lot of clients, they have these very large 2-family properties where it looks naturally just on the surface like the 3rd floor could maybe be converted into a 3rd unit, and they say, okay, I want to take the next step with Adam. What could you share what that flow would look like and obviously every deal is different, like you mentioned, but I'm just curious, just high level, without getting into too much specifics, what does that process most often look like? If it's very, all over the place, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, I would get hired first, and then I would do a zoning analysis of what you've got, make sure it's legal, make sure that what kind of building type you have, what zone you're in, and then usually sit down with the client and say what their options are. Like I said, as a general rule, adding units isn't a problem if you're within the limits of your building type and in your zone, but there may be roadblocks. So I can generally give a yellow light maybe, or a red light. It's very difficult to give a green light without actual plans, but because someone has to go and measure everything. Usually architects then get brought in, and then the architect would do a feasibility study. They don't necessarily design the building, but they'll do a block, like a box. Like, this is the box you can build by right in the zoning district, or this is how you could go about adding the unit, not in designing the building for it, but just sort of generally laying it out to see if it works. And then measuring things like setbacks. Now, we need to know whether the building is compliant currently. Is it a pre-existing non-conforming structure, meaning that it exists pre-zoning, but it no longer complies, which I would say is most of Somerville, because most of Somerville you could not build today. And if so, are we doing something that would exacerbate that nonconformity or create a new nonconformity, because those would be a problem. So it's a question of what you've got and where it's laid out, and I've seen so many oddball things in Somerville, it's really hard to extrapolate. That's why you really need a lawyer, me or anybody. Someone has to run it down, and then an architect has to go and measure everything and run that down, and then I can take a look at the architect's measurements and we can come up with a strategy going forward. But a lot of people under the new zoning have had a lot of good success in moving things forward. It's just a process.
Yeah. To shift gears a little bit, you mentioned earlier we have a new mayor, Jake Wilson, and in his speech, which I listened to, he talked a lot about trying to make things better when it comes to housing in terms of permitting and zoning. It sounded very optimistic and positive. I'm curious, you've been in Somerville for a long time. I'm sure you've heard a lot of things from a lot of different mayors. And it's very early days, so there's a bit of, we're just gonna have to wait and see. But what is your initial impression here on the talk and the excitement and optimism versus the reality of what could realistically change maybe for the better when it comes to permitting and zoning? If you have any sort of inside scoop on where you feel like things are headed in the next maybe 3 to 6 months around that, or if you think it's just a much longer game and it doesn't work that way,
Well, I mean, Mayor Wilson's saying all the right things and he's asking all the right questions. His transition team actually interviewed me, asking these kinds of things, like what would I do to change the zoning and change the process in town to make things better. And I certainly gave them an earful, because I've been sort of ruminating on these things for a long time. So I'm glad to be asked. I mean, like I said, he's asking the questions, and he seems like a person who's going to move it. As a city councilor, he was like that. So I think that's in his DNA, so I'm very optimistic about it. I mean, they've done some things to their credit already, not, in the last year or so, to speed things along. There used to be this pre-submittal meeting requirement. You'd have to file a pre-submittal application, and then like a month later, or so, have a pre-submittal meeting with various city departments to determine what to do. And then after that, then you'd go and have a neighborhood meeting and all. And it's like, I understand if you don't understand zoning why you would need that. I know for a case like what I need to do. I don't need a pre-submittal meeting and waste 2 months doing this to get through a pre-submittal meeting to tell me what I already know. So what they did is they made them optional, which is excellent, because I don't need them, but I know that some people do. And there may be a certain case worth an oddball situation where I want one, but to require people to go through that hoop, I don't understand. There are things like right now, after you have that second neighborhood, after the final neighborhood meeting, you can't file the application for 2 weeks. I have no idea why. Oftentimes I've had the neighborhood meeting, I have the entire application uploaded into the city's portal to submit it, and I just put on my calendar 2 weeks later to click the submit button. For no reason in particular. I don't really understand what that waiting period is for. So, getting rid of that would be nice. I mean, there are a number of other things that are kind of like that in the system, which don't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know what people were thinking when they put them in place, but they're there, and I just follow the rules as they are. But they don't make a ton of sense. I think there's also a problem with an interplay between condo conversion, inclusionary housing, the demolition delay through historic, and the zoning ordinance. Because I think all of these things, and this is what I've told the mayor's transition team, are all pushing in different directions. And I think that is a fundamental problem right now. And the city, I'm not saying I know what the answer is, or necessarily I'm going to come up with the answer. I just think that Somerville needs to figure out what it wants. Because right now it's just got contradictory rules, and they keep getting more contradictory, which makes developers and contractors and lawyers just not want to do things here. For instance, the zoning ordinance wants you to build more housing, as we've discussed, right? However, they recently changed the condo conversion ordinance to have, instead of a 1-year waiting period if you buy the building vacant, now it's a 2-year waiting period.
Yeah.
And then the demolition, and Somerville has a demolition delay through historic. If you're tearing a building down that's over to 75 years old, of which most of Somerville is, right?
All 1900s, yeah.
Yeah, and there's no other place to build housing. Like, there's no massive open space. So basically, to build something new, you're going to have to take something down. So we used to have a 9-month demolition delay where you'd have to, if they found the building significant, which, good chunk of the time they do, then they imposed the 9-month delay. Then it became 12 months. Now it's 18 months, right? So, so what you're telling, and then, so you've got that, and then you've got the affordable housing, which is a 20% requirement. And we said at the Chamber of Commerce, where what is sort of running point on zoning matters, that at some point you're going to increase the affordable housing requirement, and you're going to create more housing, more affordable housing, more affordable housing. And you're going to hit a peak, and then you're going to raise that requirement so much you're going to create less housing because people won't build anything because it's not financially feasible to do so. And we said when they increased it from 12.5% and 17.5% to 20%, we're like, I think you may be past that peak because I think at 20%, people aren't going to build it. And the city's not really building housing, right? So it's private developers who are building the affordable housing. And we said, if you increase it to 20%, you're going to probably get fewer affordable units at the end of the day. They agreed to revisit that after the 20% went into place. I saw that the study came back recently and said, yes, the 20% is creating less affordable housing, which, I know, that's what we said. So, so the question is, if you want to create more housing, which the zoning is encouraging, but yet you're making it so it's hard to condo convert, and you're making, they're asking the home rule petition to the state for rent control. So if you rent it, you have the rent control. If you sell it, you have the condo conversion delay. And you're making it so I have to wait 18 months to do the demolition, which means I can't get a rate lock on a loan to do the construction because no one's going to sit 18 months,
They're
for
demotivating
that.
all the developers who are building housing stock.
Exactly. And so, for all these things, and then the affordable housing is up to 20%. And then obviously there are public realm requirements like sidewalks and street trees or whatever particular project is required to do. They're all kind of contradictory. I'm not saying what the answer should be or which of those should take precedence, but you can't have all of them. It just seems to me that if one part's making you want to build this and the other part's saying you can't build this, then no one's going to build anything. So that's an issue.
Well, what you just said actually triggered something in me. So I had a number of local Somerville residents. I mentioned I was going to be talking with you on the podcast, and I said, if you have any questions, let me know. And one of them was, okay, can you ask Adam Dash if he could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the zone? And this is probably really hard because, like you said, it's all intertwined, and there is no one thing. So I read this question like it's a little more complicated than that. But let's just, for the fun of it, if you were to just do one thing that you think would help improve things in Somerville when it comes to building more housing, what would that one thing be, and how would you change it?
Yeah, I wish it was just one thing. Zoning is so complicated.
Yeah.
Perhaps making more things by right. That was one of the goals of the new zoning, because before, under the old zoning, which we had from 1990, which ended in 2019, almost everything needed some kind of permit. Special permit, variance, something. You pretty much couldn't do almost anything by right, except for a few things. Now, they've made more things by right. If you build the appropriate building type in the appropriate zone of the appropriate dimensions, it's by right. But like I said, you're not going to be able to build it until you can tear the thing down, and you can't tear the existing thing down unless you go through the demo delay, which is too long for you to get your financing, so then you can't do the project. So it's sort of I would like if I could wave a wand, I would have all of the laws pointing in the right direction, in the same direction, because they're not. They're pointing against each other, and there's clearly money to be made at some level, or else developers wouldn't be doing anything. But I certainly, like I said, I do Cambridge, I do Medford. There are a lot of developers who just don't want to work in Somerville because it's just too hard.
I've experienced that too. Yeah,
and it takes too long. I would say making the time frame quicker, making more things by right. If we decide this is what we want in this location, then all the other stuff should just go away, right? If you're asking me to wave a wand. I'm not saying it's right, But I'm just saying, if you're going to let me build a triple decker in this location, then I should not be stopped from tearing down that single family house. And I should not be prevented from, if I want a conduit or whatever, all those things should be allowed. And then you have it by right through the whole process, not just by right through zoning, but by right through historic, by right through condo conversion, by right through the affordable, which doesn't apply for the 3 units, right? So all of those, if you could get that all pointing in the right direction and save those restrictions for projects which are larger and have an economy of scale. If I'm building 200 units, it's much easier to give 20% up affordable than if I'm building 10. Right?
Totally makes sense. That's a really good point. And that actually brings me to sort of the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, which is some of these big projects in Somerville. So I don't know how comfortable you are getting into it, but I'd love to hear. I think you said you're working on the Star Market project, which I've been following very closely. I've had a lot of clients who've bought around there and are excited to see that go off. I'm curious if you can share how things are going with the project, where we're at. I know they recently, I think, started demoing. They demoed the Star Market. So, I'm curious to know, do you have a sense of when that's going to be actually available? Obviously, these timelines change all the time, but just how things are going with that project, I'd love to hear more.
Full speed ahead is how things are going with the project. It just was a complicated project, and it was a 40B project, meaning that it went through the state's 40B for having more than 25% affordable. Actually, it's got about 43% of the units are affordable. However, that even actually doesn't really tell the whole story because the affordable units tend to be larger family size units, so there are fewer of them than the market rate units, which tend to be smaller. So the number of units isn't really, the square footage of the affordable units versus the market units is pretty much about 50-50. It's just that there are fewer affordable units because the affordable units are taking up more space in the building for valid reasons, right? But that was an example of a great friendly 40B that we did with the prior mayoral administration, where we went through and it was very well received by the neighborhood. There was not a lot of opposition. There's umpteen pages of conditions and waivers that were put on it, but because it's a weird site and there's a lot going on, that I don't know if you realize it's on Winter Hill. The site is at this very steep grade. Building the buildings and the buildings just go down the hill. It's kind of hard to do, like the storefront height requirements, you have to be within this minimum or this maximum, but when the land goes like that, you can't step out into a drop into the building. So because that's kind of what happens if you keep the level straight across the building, but the land drops down. And then there's going to be in the front a big public plaza. And then in the back on Sewell Street, there's going to be a new public park. There's going to be a community center in the building.
Yeah, I'm pumped for that.
It's an awesome project in a long, decrepit situation. And the Walgreens that was there on site, which has been torn down, we were able to get relocated back to their old site about a block away on Broadway. So,
interesting.
Because they had the place up the street on Broadway and this place, and they closed the one on Broadway. But then they, when we were buying and going to tear it down, they moved this location from the Star Market site back to the old site. So the neighbor didn't even lose the pharmacy, which was important.
Yeah. Well, do you know when that project's supposed to be up and run? And are those rental units or are those being sold?
That I don't know that level of detail because that's not a zoning thing. But it's I believe they're rental, but I could be wrong.
I thought they were rental, if I remember.
I believe so. So those are. How that's going to get done? It's going to be it's 2 big buildings. It's going to be a lot of work. Couple of years, I would think at least.
2-3 years, yeah, probably. Yeah. What do you think about another big project, Copper Mill? This has been a heated one in Davis Square. I don't know if you saw those. There were some posters that came out showing the tower shooting up 1 billion miles into the sky, scaring people off. I'm curious, what your view as a zoning attorney who deals with these kind of bigger projects, how you feel about, the argument. One side of the argument is, it destroys the character of the neighborhood, it changes, and the other side is but we need more housing and affordability. I'm curious, where you land on that. Do you believe there should be a middle ground? Do you believe, look, we're in a housing crisis, we need to do what we need to do here?
Well, not my project, so I can't speak to what's going on in it. But I am, involved with the Davis Square Neighborhood Council. My business is in Davis Square, so I would be a member of it. So I'm aware of what's going on, and I guess I'm not thrilled with the idea that they engaged the neighborhood council, talked to them for a while, then kind of went silent, and then suddenly a 40B application comes in. Just doesn't seem like the communication has been there. I wouldn't do it that way. because you're going to talk to these people eventually. You might as well talk to them beforehand rather than hide the ball and then spring it on them. I'm still unclear whether this is a friendly 40B with the city or a hostile 40B where the city doesn't want it. I haven't, with the change of administrations, I don't know. I know Mayor Wilson's put out some statement about it, but it wasn't really addressing whether they're in favor or not. Typically, when we did the Star Market, it was a friendly 40B. So when the letter went into the state asking for approval of that, the city sent it for us because the city was in favor of it. And so the city was the applicant asking the state to do it. This one, the developer, from what I understand, filed it, which is not usually how a friendly 40B goes, but that doesn't mean it can't. I mean, the new zoning divides the city into 3 areas. There's transformational, which is like clear cut everything and build big. That's like Assembly Row, Boynton Yards, that kind of thing. There's the what do they call it? The preservation areas, which are like the neighborhoods where they don't want things to change drastically. And then there's the enhancement areas, which is Davis Square is one, which is, we shouldn't be this close to the T. We probably shouldn't have single-story commercial storefronts. That just seems like not the amount of density you need around a red line station. But we don't want to knock it all down and go 1 million stories like Assembly Square, right? So there's a middle ground. Now, is this enhancement, this 26 stories or whatever in a 4-story zone, is that enhancement or is that transformational? I guess it depends how you look at it. You're right. I mean, we do need the housing for sure.
Yeah.
We do need density around transit for sure. Can this, and I don't know if they're proposing parking. I thought they weren't, but I don't know the details of it.
The latest version, I think, is announced.
Yeah, so then you're not going to be dealing with traffic issues. But the city, as far as 40Bs go as well, the city has asserted over the years that it's in what they call the safe harbor, meaning that it has enough affordable housing that it is now, under the statute, immune from 40B developments. However, that's why these things like Clarendon Hill Towers or Star Market were friendly 40Bs, because the city, was allowing them. Now, I don't know no one's really tested the safe harbor theory as a hostile 40B. And that, I think, is where the rubber would meet the road if, in fact, this turns out to be a hostile 40B and the city is opposed to it. The state statute obviously gives the Zoning Board of Appeals in Somerville very little ability to say no at some level, although they can impose, conditions, and they can grant or not grant certain waivers for certain things. But at the end of the day, it's very hard for a zoning board to say no to a 40B development that has the 25% required affordable housing. So it would be an interesting legal question if this turns into a hostile 40B and Somerville asserts safe harbor, where that lands. I'm interested to follow how it goes.
Me too.
But I don't know. I'm just surprised when it came in as a 40B, because especially over the holidays like that, without any notice to the Davis Square Neighborhood Council, I wouldn't have done it that way. But I'm assuming there was a reason for it.
Yeah, I was surprised. Seems like sort of a lack of communication and transparency a little bit.
I can't say. I mean, I
can't say for sure. That's speculation on my part too. Totally.
And I know a lot of people, and I've seen online, a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't.
Exactly. It's very divisive in both directions. Exactly. Okay, to shift gears a little bit, this is another Somerville community member question, which was someone who clearly is plugged in. They basically were like, look, in terms of zoning attorneys in Somerville, it's you and Rich DiGirolamo are kind of the 2 big names that you always hear thrown around, or at least I definitely hear that a lot. I don't want to say that there aren't other, I'm not trying to throw shade on any other zoning attorneys in Somerville, but those are the sort of the 2 big names that I hear all the time. And they were wondering, why is it that there's kind of the 2 big ones, and how does that sort of does that in any way sort of impact the way projects are put together, closed, the rules and regulations and all of that? Do you think it has an impact, positive or negative? And just why do you think it kind of played out that way?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, how I got into it and how there used to be other attorneys who did it and they died or retired. So, and I'm still here. I mean, I would say that if we were bad, then we probably wouldn't be the only people doing it. So I would say that we must be good at it, because people still keep coming. We've been successful. I think that there's some level of efficiency in sort of knowing the rules. And I have been told by people at the city that they like my applications because when they come in, they're all complete and everything's buttoned up and in the right place, and they don't have to go back to somebody and go, oh, this is wrong and that is wrong, and you have to resubmit this and resubmit that. So I am, there's a level of efficiency to move things forward with someone who's done this so many times like I have. I don't, like I said, I think the problem is when the zoning got changed in 2019, Somerville has zoning which is very different from the rest of the state with this form-based zoning. Others are now catching up, but we have up until now had very, very unusual and complicated zoning. We have the submittal, there's a submittal guidebook, like a submittal handbook. It's 60 pages long to tell you how to submit applications under the zoning ordinance. So when your submittal guidebook is 60 pages long, that tells you how complicated your zoning ordinance is, right? Not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, it's just saying that it's not something you can just do. So when it got adopted, the new zoning in December of 2019, and then there was the holidays, and then people were starting to get their ducks in a row, and I was reviewing projects under the new zoning, and then COVID hit almost immediately after, like in March 2020, and then nothing happened for a while. It's like the zoning is, 5 years old, but it really kind of isn't because there was a period of time in there where nothing was going on. So, and then we had to study and learn. And during a lot of that COVID period, I spent studying the new zoning and running models with it and thinking it through and, putting in the time and work. And I do know some attorneys have told me that they did work in Somerville, but it was just too hard to learn the new zoning and they weren't going to bother it. And they'd just stick to where else. Yeah, it was just a lot of effort. And it really wasn't worth it. Maybe I'm crazy. I like this sort of thing, but I find zoning fascinating. So, I put in the effort and the work, and I think it's paid off in the end. Like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it or nefarious with it. I'm pretty much any city or town, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 attorneys who handle all the zoning cases there, just because everybody's zoning ordinance is completely different. Ours is more different than most, but they're all different. And how words are interpreted by the people in office are different. And that difference changes when administrations change and personnel change, and then they interpret the same. The law doesn't change, the words don't change, but the interpretation of the words can change. And if you don't do this all the time, you wouldn't know because it's not written anywhere. It doesn't say in the code, this word now means this and it used to mean that. It just has the word. And if you haven't done it before, you wouldn't know that. So I think there is a benefit to having somebody who's used to working in the town and has seen enough cases. Not that someone couldn't do it. I just don't think it would be as good or efficient. And like I said, that's probably why you'd have to ask clients why they call me. I don't know. I think I do a good work, maybe.
That makes total sense to me, right? It's like, I could read the 60 pages and take my best stab at it and have no idea what I'm doing and make all kinds of mistakes. Or I could pay you, who has the 30 years of experience, and you could guide me and tell me, oh, this is a mistake. Don't waste your time, Sage, or go forward, and here's the reasons why, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, or architects give me the plan, and I'm like, no, you need to show this. I'm telling you now, I'm going to file this in 30 days, and 30 days later, they're going to ask for this. Just put it on now. We'll save ourselves 30 days of headache. That's that kind of thing I do bring to the table. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I have a couple others here, just Somerville resident questions. One was around zoning codes. They said, are there certain zoning codes that have serious potential for substantial housing development? And I think that they're wondering maybe, okay, if I'm under a particular zoning code, is this like a giant green blinking light that I should maybe reach out to Adam about a potential, maybe they're thinking of selling, maybe they have a cousin who's a general contractor or builder, and they're like, hey, maybe I want to turn this into something else. Is there something they should be looking for that signals that maybe there's more of an opportunity with the lot that they have, or they're thinking of buying there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's got to do with lot size is a big one. I've had a lot of people who have a very large lot.
What do you define as very large? Because when I think of a typical lot in Somerville, I think of like
depends on the zoning. Depends on the zoning district and the frontage. So, but if you had a big enough lot, then it's possible to split the lot. The new zoning has made it a lot easier to merge lots or divide lots. And and while you can't have 2 principal structures on a lot, if you divide the lot, then you could put one building on one lot and a new building on the other lot.
Or you could family, for example.
Correct. Or like, let's say I've seen plenty of lots that are large, which have like a 3-family shoved to the right side, let's say. and then they have a big yard on the left. If you divided the lot and you had enough land, you could leave that 3-family where it is and then build maybe another 3-family on the other lot. So I think if you had a lot,
Cottage, maybe.
or whatever. So if you have a large enough lot, then there is density to be had. So that would be worth looking into.
Okay.
I guess if you were in the urban residence zone, there was a lot more you could do, which I discussed earlier. That is the one that allows for larger apartment building kind of things. If you have a commercial property that you're looking to demolish to do housing, that's a lot of people have been doing that. If you've got, because then you don't have to worry about tenant displacement for condo conversion, for instance, or at all, right? There are no residential tenants to displace. Or if you had a decrepit building that's falling down or condemned or something like that, then the historic may let it go. If it were so structurally unsound, because I've had some cases where, you could historically preserve it if you wanted to, but it's going to fall down by the time we have the conversation. So sort of like, what are you preserving here? It's really a public safety issue right now. So there are a number of things that are worth taking a look at, depending on the zone. We've also had a lot of people it's turned out their properties seem to be zoned incorrectly, where the building is a commercial building in a residential zone or vice versa. And we have gone or that it's so close to a train station, but it's zoned very low, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So we've had some luck in going forward to the city council and asking them to change the zoning of a particular parcel to allow for development. But those are kind of one-off things. But yeah, I mean, distance to transit's another one. If you're very close to transit, then more density is going to be a little more tolerable. I know that there's this proposal in the city council now, if you're within a certain parameter of a T station, to allow all those properties to be up to 6 stories.
Oh,
So,
wow. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, that hasn't passed.
Yeah.
It's been in discussion for some time, but that would make some sense.
Yeah.
As opposed to what Cambridge did, where they sort of allowed you to go 5 stories pretty much almost anywhere, depending whether as long as you have enough of a lot. Somerville has decided they're not going to do that, but they're going to concentrate on the transit stations. Now, what the distance from that is not determined, and I don't know what the new mayoral administration's position is, because this is coming more from the city council. But that proposal is out there. So if you're close to a T station, there might be some value coming your way, but we don't know.
Do you know, just curious for that proposal, do you know how close to a T station we're talking?
No.
I was just curious. All right. Another question here from another Somerville resident. This is a very specific question, so I don't know if you'll have an answer, but they're asking the process of adding an elevator to a multi-story home to make it more accessible to age in place. Like, have you ever gone through that process, or do you have a sense of how difficult or easy it is to get an approval for this kind of project?
Yes, I've gone through that process. Yes, it is difficult. That is one where you've got, it's a problem depending on what your neighbors are like, really. Because if some people don't like change at all next to them, right? So it's a matter of if you've got someone who doesn't want anything on your property to change, and you've got to do an elevator, and the elevator requires like a head house or bumping out the back of your building, that's going to make it somewhat larger, and maybe you need a special permit to do that because of the nature of the property, and then the neighbor can oppose that. I had one of those projects killed by a neighbor, by someone who was trying to do an elevator to do an age-in place.
So if one neighbor just says, I don't feel comfortable with it, that could really be it.
Well, it could be a problem if they go to the board and get all the other neighbors on their side, and then go to the hearing and all oppose it. The board may not like that. And even if the board says, no, we're going to approve it anyway, they could appeal the approval to court and tie you up for years. So,
I see.
it's an issue.
Okay, that's a good one.
But now maybe you could do it by right based on the size of your lot and all that. I don't know.
I see. Yeah, case dependent. Another question is, and this might be a little bit outside the scope of what you do, but they're just talking about how Somerville is often called like a contractor's nightmare. The permitting process is really challenging. You get tied up in sort of permitting hell and I have a lot of clients who've gone through this before. Are you able to share anything about why you think that is? and any efforts to, and we talked a little bit about this already with like, Jake Wilson making some comments about trying to improve this, but like, are there any efforts that you're aware of to make building, renovating easier, more seamless, and smoother process in Somerville?
Yeah, I mean, Somerville has had exponential growth. I mean, when I first got here, it wasn't like this, right? So we never had, 20-something story buildings or more in Somerville. It just wasn't a thing. And now suddenly you've got this group of building inspectors, and while they've hired some, to inspect all these large buildings and keep up with all of the projects all at once across the city, personally, I just don't think there's enough staff. And I know that's also a problem across the state, getting people to go into public service and work in here. Because if you have the skills to be a building inspector, you could also be a contractor, right? So, and probably make more money. So it's tough to get people. And then obviously being in government these days is not a very necessarily pleasant thing, because people are very aggressive towards elected and appointed and public officials. So it is not necessarily a thankful job to be a building inspector, and being forced to somehow say, well, this is wrong, you need to fix it, isn't what people want to hear. So I think it's while even if the city wanted to hire people, it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, to hire good people. But the fact that Mayor Wilson is asking the question and seeing the problem, I think is it. And maybe it's more than just the number of people, but what they're doing and how it's organized, I don't know.
Maybe technology a little bit too could help them.
Yeah, I know they've incorporated some, and I know right now the inspectional services superintendent is interim, so mayor's going to have to appoint somebody new because our superintendent left to go to another community. So, and the new mayor will have to appoint somebody, and I think that would hopefully be something that would be on the interview question list about how to improve these things.
Cool. I mean, I think we're pretty close to wrapping up here, but just I think one question I have is like, who, for people listening right now, who should be contacting you? Like what, I don't know if you have, it sounds like to me like every client's different, every case is different, you're doing a lot of different things. Is that fair to say? Or there is, if they have any Somerville zoning questions, should they reach out? Should they reach out to you for other things? Can you talk a little bit about sort of who you really service and who should reach out to you, so the right people are reaching out to you and the wrong people aren't, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, people hire us to handle projects. They hire us to review what they can and can't do, whether because they're going to do something or they want to sell the property and know what can be done so they can tell potential buyers, for instance. I have clients who are looking to buy a property but don't want to put a bid in unless they can get some idea whether they can get a green light or a yellow light or a red light on what they want to do, or what they can do at all, if anything. I've had to tell people, unfortunately, you can't do anything sometimes. So it is, it's an interesting conundrum sometimes. So yeah, I mean, people who are interested in doing any of these things could call and want to have me do a zoning review or talk about it or get permits for them, or we handle real estate closings as well, the purchases and sales and all that. Yeah, obviously could reach out. Obviously we're not a public FAQ kind of place, but but for because I can't give advice to people without reviewing their property because as you've probably seen from this whole conversation, every property is completely different. I can't answer the question without doing the research, and that's what I get paid to do. So it is, and it takes time. I mean, it's not something I just know off the top of my head all the time. So so I guess, if anyone is curious about any of these things, I'm always happy to talk in general about stuff like I am with you right now, Sage. But, if people wanted to, hire us, I mean, sure, we get free consultation if they're looking to hire us to talk about the project in general. But to actually get like concrete advice, I need to do the work and get hired to do that. I mean, like I said, here at 48 Grove Street in Davis Square, feel free to reach out. 617-625-7373 is the phone number. Dash at adam-law.com, like all spelled out, is the email. I mean, it's all online anyway.
And I'll put it in the description as well here of the video. So if anyone's looking to reach out to Adam with any Somerville, Cambridge, or Medford zoning questions, they can reach out to you. And if you guys want to subscribe to my newsletter, I'll include that in the description as well. Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate you being here and giving your expertise and thoughts. I had a lot of fun, and I appreciate someone with just like a wealth of knowledge being able to share a little time with us. So thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me, Sage, and thanks for everyone who sat through all of this. I know zoning isn't necessarily everybody's favorite thing, but if you're watching, maybe it's yours. I mean, it's certainly, I like it.
There's a lot of secret zoning nerds out there, believe me. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate your time. Have a good one.
Take care. You too.